All right, we are live. Hello, this is Christian Idealism, and today I have special guest Michael Jones on to discuss his debate with Holy Koolaid, and then I have another guest named Kenneth. And Kenneth, you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. My name is Kenneth Vaughan. I am a sociologist specializing in religion and politics, both separately and together. I guess we'll share a little bit about my background. I had a long road to sociology, but the long and short of it is that growing up in San Antonio, Texas, I did an undergraduate degree in sociology after having about 9 different majors prior to that, and went through philosophy, English, classics, quite a few others. But sociology kept calling me home, and it was just rebellion against it. And I spent some time working overseas, but I felt very attracted to coming back. So I got a terminal master's at a really underrated sociology of religion program at the University of Texas at San Antonio. They sent me to Baylor University, which I resisted for a while. I didn't want to be a Christian going to Baylor, and I had overestimated the sense of the Christian identity there. But not that they're anti, but just it wasn't Christian rearing or anything like that. The program was mostly secular. But anyway, it was one of the best places in the world to study sociology of religion at that time. That's really what I've always been about. And so I got my doctorate there in 2019. I've been working as an assistant professor in residence in the Department of Sociology at the University of Connecticut since then. Another familiar name people may know there is Bradley Wright. He's done some material out of the General Social Survey. He's got I forgot the full title, but it's like Christians are hate-filled bigots and other lies you've been told, something like that. It's an interesting study out of the General Social Survey. So if anyone, I just want to plug his book. He's a good guy, a good friend of mine. And one of it, you cited his one of his meta-analyses too. Yeah. So that's where I've been now. Certain things aren't official, but I have accepted a tenure-track position elsewhere, and so this is my last year here. Don't think I'm supposed to announce that yet until things are on the dotted line, but the future is relatively open.
Nice.
Yeah. So
for those who don't know, Kenneth and I have been talking for several months now because he's been helping me with a video that's going to come out in a week. Like, is Christianity evil? Going over a lot of different studies. He helped me with the script and the video, so he's been a big help. And then this debate with Holy Koolaid came up after. To recap, James told me about this debate like a year ago, but he didn't have an opponent yet. And then finally we got Holy Koolaid to do it. And then I talked to Kenneth. I'm like, hey, this is coming up. Can you help me prepare for it? And he's been a huge help with preparing for this debate. So I thought it'd be good to have him on, help with the review of the debate.
Okay, so I guess from an outsider's perspective, I thought that Holy Koolaid actually did much better than the other previous debates, at least on this topic specifically. So, like, I know you debated a few people on it, and then specifically Aaron Raw, like, that didn't really go very well. It seemed like this one, though, was much different. Like, I felt like he was really prepared, much better than the previous people you debated on the topic. So.
Well, yeah, he's probably the first person I've debated on this topic that actually prepared. So that was kind of good. The only problem with his main argument is that he seemed to bank so much on getting me to just sort of admit that Christianity is dangerous in some way. That was his whole argument. But as I said, it just reduces everything to absurdity. Like, it doesn't, like, yeah, I'll admit it's dangerous, but in an absurd sense where everything is dangerous. So really, I'm admitting that to say Christianity is dangerous is to say it's absurd. So it was really surprised the debate turned into just a semantic game, because what do we mean by dangerous? I mean, like, let's say like this right by my desk, like, what if I said this is enjoyable? You'd be like, well, no, it isn't. It's a tape measure. Well, my cat enjoys it. I've seen him bat it around sometimes. Therefore, it's enjoyable. Well, by that logic, everything's enjoyable to somebody or some creature somewhere. But that would be absurd. We wouldn't actually say it actually truly is enjoyable in a meaningful sense. And likewise, his definition of dangerous just didn't have any meaning to it.
Yeah, I think that was, I mean, you did, I can't remember exactly when you mentioned this, but you said that, like, it was during the back and forth where it's like, well, I think we're going, he said, like, I think we're going off by definitions of what's dangerous. Like, I mean, by his definition, I mean, it feels like anything would be dangerous. Like, at least almost anything would be dangerous, because of these, like, very specific examples. you know. And he did bring up one example, or at least one argument in his opening statement, which was about the whole prayer thing, which I don't think you didn't focus on that too much. Maybe you have something to say on that, or no?
Well, it was such a weird argument because I could be like, yeah, some people manipulate this and manipulate other people. But I mean, like, for example, Joshua David Wright wrote a paper called Empirical Perspectives on Religion and Violence, and notes that a lot of the aspects that that we often associate with religion as being harmful are not really unique to religion. They often can be used in secular ideologies or in political ideologies. And a lot of that prayer stuff is sort of just, following after charismatic leaders, buying into that kind of stuff. And it's hard to really say that Christianity necessarily causes that, just because someone may use it in that sort of way. Charismatic leaders use all sorts of things to manipulate people and use what they want. There's been no study that show that intrinsic religiosity, specifically with large Christian sample size, leads to the sort of effects he was saying. So I was taken aback going, okay, well, where's the study that would show a connection here? Because we just can't say this just because. But Kenneth, what were your thoughts so far?
Yeah. So a few things have come up since. First, I was impressed too. Just like as a sociologist, I thought both of you were well researched, well acquainted with the literature. I had tried to guess what the debate would look like when I had caught advanced wind of it, and I thought it was everyone had overperformed. I thought just kind of talking to people afterwards, I kind of share in some of the concerns that it's kind of similar to what you're talking about now, that it has to do with framing. Now, again, as a sociologist, I don't have training like in formal logic, and I'm not skilled at debate, so take my opinion for what it's worth. When I heard the topic, is Christianity dangerous? I thought what it would look like to answer that question fell into the category of the things that Holy Koolaid had kind of caveated at the beginning and said, this isn't my goal, right? To show that, there's like a weight of balance. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that's what I heard him say, right? That the goods aren't outweighed by the bad. I was thinking in terms of net effects. I was thinking in something, I guess, less dependent on reducing to a potentiality for dangerous. I did agree with that framing in your response toward the end. And so it could be, from that perspective, I felt the case that Christianity is dangerous wasn't made. However, I don't want to impute a goal onto Holy Koolaid that he wasn't trying to make either. And so if he just wanted to show that there is something that emerges from a normative practice of Christianity, or even a relatively normative practice of Christianity, that could be dangerous, I think he accomplished that. And it doesn't sound like, Michael, that you disagree either. It's just, to me, now I guess some of this is subjective, right? Because I know that in certain spaces online, people will try to say, Christianity is evil and dangerous, atheism is evil and dangerous, or perfect, God's literal or figurative gift to humanity. And that's not the sort of framing that I'm used to in professional work. So I did have to kind of imagine what that would look like. But to the best of my ability, I thought that, that particular case, as I understood it, wasn't made. And it's not to say that Holy Koolaid failed, because he may have had goals of his own, and I don't want to impute motives onto him. I thought the prayer point was interesting. I thought the case for the effectiveness of prayer was a little understated, but I don't blame you for not firing back on that, because I don't think your argument was contingent upon it at all. There's a bit more, and granted, Christian apologists have done this too, but there's a bit more. I would say the literature leans mixed positive on that, and it depends on what angle you're looking at. Intercessory prayer studies, particularly, all of them are controversial, but there are more positive effects than we're given credit for in the literature review that he offered. I know he lists the one. Oh, which one is it? I wrote it down here. He does a good job. He refers to this by the names of the authors, which are momentarily escaping me, so I'm kind of guilty of what I'm complaining about. But he refers to it as the Templeton-funded study. Now, this is a very popular one on atheist blog rolls, and it'll typically be referred to as the Templeton study, which is wrong, and Holy Koolaid does not do that, so I am very happy that Holy Koolaid did not do that. I think he overstates the Templeton Fund's Christian reputation, but that's neither here nor there. That's a very popular one. I just wanted to like say something about, because like people will cite that and say it actually shows that those that were prayed for did even worse. But the problem with that was there was no effective control group. I mean, there technically is, but they had no way of guaranteeing that like the people who weren't prayed for by the experimental prayers did not have like friends and family praying for them. Subsequent research, which Holy Koolaid did cite, so kudos there, does at least do their best to address that shortcoming. Of course, that polling like shows a problem here. That like I think upwards of like 90% of people said, oh yeah, there were also people praying for me at home too, which wasn't accounted for in the Templeton funded study. So I thought maybe that point on the ineffectiveness of prayer was a little bit oversold per the research, but yeah, I don't think that provides, even if it all were negative, right, for the sake of argument. To me, yeah, I don't think that would show that Christianity in essence was dangerous. I think that would show that a certain practice of Christianity could lend itself to neglecting medical attention if one wanted to reason their way there. But I wouldn't see that as definitive of Christianity in essence. And so just that didn't make that point to me, at least. And it sounds like there might be some agreement there.
No, and just to add to that, there was one commenter who, Jordan Cox, said that religion can be dangerous is not evidence that it is inherently dangerous in some essential ways. So, just because you can say like, oh, look, these people are using and twisting this around over there, that doesn't mean Christianity is necessarily inherently dangerous. Like, you actually got to show, this is why I put up this graph in the beginning. Maybe I could pull that up here in a second here, but remember that graph where I said, you got to take a Bible verse, make sure you interpret it properly. After that, you then have to show that most Christians agree with this interpretation, and then show actual studies that show that it leads to these horrible consequences. That's how you have to draw this connection. And you can actually, atheists get upset when I bring that up, but here, I'll just share my screen really quickly here to bring it up here. Here you go, Kyle. So this slide here, for example. Now, I realized this when I was listening to David Wood debate. You could do this with Islam quite easily, because you could take Surah 65 verse 4, where it says a woman does not need a period for you to sleep with her. Okay. Most commentators, as Wood pointed out in his debate, agree that's what that says. The majority of the Muslim world interprets it that way. They allowed child brides, and we know that leads to dangerous effects. So it's very easy to show that. If he wants to do the same thing with prayer, he would need to show this sort of connection, and that just wasn't done in the debate.
No, right. And yeah, I feel like this maybe like for future debates, I mean, there might be. So is this like your standard to like determine whether or not Christianity is dangerous? Is you have to go through these steps logically, basically?
This is not a standard. This is what I got from certain debates. People asking, well, how could you need to provide a way to show Christianity could be dangerous so people know what they're actually debating for. And I'm like, okay, well, this is the most rational way I could think of something. Because, you could take like a Bible verse, like, do not spare the rod with your kid. Okay. And you interpret it to mean you can hit your kid. Well, most Christians today do not interpret that to mean you can go around beating your child. There's no poll data or survey data that shows that.
Right. And you can sort of use the same reasoning for like certain Deuteronomy texts where it talks about like you should stone to death homosexuals, or I don't know, maybe there's some different ways you can interpret that. But yeah, I mean, if most Christians are not doing that, then it's not, you can't really make the argument that it's dangerous, right? So
right. And so, yeah, and then I was thinking after, I mean, you could do this with Islam. I was talking with David Wood. There's plenty of verses and commentators you could probably make the same sort of connection with. But just to jump on that prayer thing, it just seemed, I just didn't really talk much about it in the debate, because I was like, well, okay, that's interesting. That's anecdotal. But what does the actual research show? Does the research show that people are leading to these mental health issues, I guess is the best way you could phrase it, or they're going to reject medical attention? And the overwhelming majority of meta-analytical research didn't show that. And Kenneth can, of course, comment on that.
Yeah, he knows more about than I do. I'm noting that, like in research, it tends to find when the study does find a beneficial effect with intercessory prayer, like the researcher will I noticed they don't like list this as a medical risk, that like, oh, well, if this is a finding here that it's going to completely, we see this as a risk for like erasing the need for medicine in religious communities. It's recommended as supplementary towards the end, which I think is the normative way that Christians engage medicine, or most religious people engage medicine, that they go to their doctor, they pray, they kind of check all of the above. It's kind of the rational thing to do. In that regard, I guess I don't see like a high level of risk for this happening. There's certainly no indicator that it's a very normative practice. There seems to be, good, even if it does nothing. But there's what I was going to say earlier, and I kind of forgot to get to, is where you see an overwhelming positive effect for prayer is at least psychologically. And by all means, fine, that could be completely in your head. That can be all, placebo or something, right? But at least from a secular perspective, it is adding something to the mix. And so then in what I would understand to be the normative Christian medical practice, which I think is in line with the scripture, it doesn't talk a whole lot about medicine, but every reference I can think of to medicine or medical practices is positive, even if it's just in passing. And so I think like the normative practice then of like, let's assume prayer doesn't work at all, that you go to the doctor, you get some treatment, you pray, and you feel a little bit more optimistic, you feel a bit more happier about life, and the net effect seems positive to me. And that was the sort of framing I was thinking of. Again, not to impute my standard onto Holy Koolaid, but that was why, per that argument, I was not convinced that Christianity appears to be dangerous because of what the certainly real excesses of a twisting of that theology in a demonstrably aberrant fashion can do.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from on that. My biggest issue with the whole thing was just the whole semantic thing. About halfway through the back and forth, I had to ask him, do you think atheism is dangerous? Do you think hospitals are dangerous? And he accepted that. And I was like, I thought he was going to say no, honestly. I thought he was going to say no, but he said yes. And then I was like, okay, well, I mean, everything's absurd at this point. There's a great book called, I mentioned in the debate, by Nathan Johnstone. He wrote this book called The New Atheism, where he replies to people like Sam Harris and Hitchens. And one of the things he notes is that, I'll just quote him. He's talking about torture in the Middle Ages. He says, between the end of the Roman Empire in the late 12th century, torture had fallen into disuse in Europe. Christendom owed its reintroduction not to bloodthirsty clerics, but to scientific jurists concerned to free justice from the reliance on God's intervention and to champion human judicial competence. So he basically notes moving away from religious ideas into more secular ideas led to the increase of torture. William Cavanaugh in his book, The Myth of Religious Violence, notes on page 174 that during the time of the 30 Years' War, these wars alleged between Protestants and Catholics, that's what we're told was happening. He debunks a lot of that, but he says, what was actually going on is the transfer of power from the church to the state was clearly a cause, not the solution of the violence of the 16th and 17th centuries. The idea that the liberal states solved the wars of religion is even more implausible than the absolutist version of the myth. So he basically notes, again, more rapid secularization, more transfer away from the church, transfer of power away from the church to the state led to more violence. From these examples and some other studies I could bring up, could we conclude secularization is necessarily dangerous? I wouldn't say that. I would not necessarily say that secularizing means these dangerous consequences. But by Holy Koolaid standard, he would have to conclude secularism, moving away from Christianity, is necessarily dangerous by his own standard he had in the debate, based on what these researchers are saying.
Yeah, so I've done research on secularization. I've done research on, like living in a religious majority climate. I presented some research recently even on like religious regulations at the state level. And there's always like a moderator and a mediator that we can look at. There's always, you take this variable that you're interested in and what happens to its influence on some process, if and when. And like the way I framed it is like, yeah, I think public religiosity is good if and when. I think public religiosity is bad if and when. I think secularization is good if and when. I think secularization is bad if and when. I know that sounds like a kind of cop-out, kumbaya, can't we all get along answer, but it is what we see in the research, right? That there are certain interaction terms, to use a quantitative language, that we can introduce that seems to, kind of make things better or worse. And does it all balance out? Probably not. I don't think we've exhausted, our options here, but I think that's a very fair way to look at the processes. So either I guess if you determine that everything's dangerous, I think everything has a dangerous potential. Sure, that is very well supported by data. Even the things that I dearly love have a dangerous potential, and things that I don't have a dangerous potential as well, right? So I think that's supported. I guess I just don't know how significant it is towards our assessment of whether or not a particular religion is dangerous. A claim I think we should, by the way, be conservative about with any religion or with a lack of with secularism or anything else, right? To label it dangerous, I think that's big, and I do worry about doing that. Mm-hmm. I don't enter apologetic discussions very often, but I think that falls into issues of like inequality and prejudice that I do worry about.
Just to quickly add, you had research that's been cited by Washington Post, haven't you?
Okay, something weird happened there. I had research that was cited by Religion News Services, and then that article got picked up in the Washington Post, and then the Washington Post version disappeared, and I don't know why. But the RNS version, but it was RNS, Washington Post, and yeah, they profiled. They cited my research and they interviewed me along with like 4 or 5 other sociologists and political scientists and asked for all of our takes on religion and the refugee crises in Europe.
And I will be actually mentioning that in my upcoming video coming out, I think in a week or so. So that'll be pretty exciting. There's some pretty good, interesting stuff you found, but yeah.
And I also, another thing is maybe the question is not whether Christianity is dangerous. Maybe the question more fundamentally is Christianity inherently dangerous, right? Because I mean, anything could be dangerous, right? If as long as it's not, I mean, even like good things can become dangerous if you use it in the wrong way. And so I think Christianity is in that same sort of boat where Christianity is not inherently dangerous, but it can be dangerous depending on the circumstance, right?
Well, here, yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody would deny that. I mean, even Holy Koolaid admitted in the debate, atheism could be dangerous. You could show examples of how secularism could be dangerous. But the problem is that you don't come out and then say, "Aha! See, you've admitted, you've conceded the debate that Christianity is dangerous," because that's an equivocation fallacy. You're defining dangerous in a very broad sense that would encompass literally everything. And you then can't turn around and then go say, see, he admitted Christianity is dangerous, and therefore we're going to define it in the sense that we actually mean it's meaningful. So it's very ironic, for lack of a better term, it's very dangerous to sort of have that kind of tactic, because if you start saying, aha, see, IP admitted Christianity is dangerous, but yeah, in the very broad and absurd sense you said, not in the limited sense that most people realize there. So that's why I would never actually admit Christianity is dangerous, because people will take that and they'll do an equivocation fallacy and they'll define it in a completely different way.
Right. Yeah, I do think that Holy Koolaid's at least definition of dangerous was a sort of equivocation. And I think that was his biggest weakness, ultimately, because I mean, if you're going to define that way, then anything is going to fit in that boat. Right now, it's weird because like he tries to, it's sort of like a bait and switch,
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what it was, if you know what I mean. So
that's what it felt like it was happening there. And I was like, no, I'm not going to say that, because this could very easily be reinterpreted, and that's not
right. And
how you're defining it is very, very different.
Right.
So Kenneth, you told me in a message that you thought that basically it was over in the opening statements. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah. So I think I touched on this earlier, but just that in terms of what I was like hoping to learn from the debate, like what position I thought could be defended, right? I wanted to hear that like I wanted to hear if Christianity had like a palpable, measurable, kind of felt dangerous impact on society or on people at large, something that I guess would either make sense from like a empirical scientific approach, or even like in a common sense approach. And to me, that isn't answered by the potentiality framing. That would be answered by, well, we can see that in either the majority of time, or even it doesn't have to be a majority, right? You could make a reason for saying, X% of the time, right? That something is considered a danger to individuals or society if it has a risk of, 20% or something of leading to these terrible outcomes. And I don't have, I don't want to put words in his mouth, and I don't have the quotes with me, but I watched it over twice. And in the introductory statement, when he kind of framed it as, okay, we're not talking about what's inherent necessarily to Christianity, which in some regards I thought was fair to say, right, look, I'm not saying this is the proper interpretation, but it is normatively taken this way. I thought that was fair. But to say then, okay, it's not something that's necessarily inherent to Christianity proper. It's not something that is maybe the majority outcome. It's not a net negative effect. I guess at that point, then, I didn't see another path for me to come to possibly be convinced that Christianity is dangerous to society, to individuals in general. I don't think that, at least as I understand it, and I'm trying to be modest here, but at least as I understand it, that question is not answered by what I thought was presented. Open to other views, but at that point I thought, okay, well, I don't really see a path forward, and I thought he did a good job for defending his case, but it just wasn't the title of the debate, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, typically, what we mean by danger is I could just Google the dictionary definition, and it's likely to cause problems or have adverse consequences. And based on what you were saying, there's just no reason to think Christianity is going to do that. Again, there's that paper I mentioned by David John Wright or Joshua David Wright, Empirical Perspectives on Religion and Violence. They note that it's really like authoritarianism, tribalism that is often paired with religion that leads to sort of damaging effects. And what they did then do in the paper is they focused in on supernaturalism. And they point out that this is really one of the defining features of religion. And actually, when you look at elements of this in the research, it actually moves away from violence. Like, it doesn't actually encourage violence, it decreases violence. The actual factors that increase violence are things like tribalism, fundamentalism, authoritarianism, and these could be paired with secular ideologies or religion. So really, when these things are sort of paired together, that's what, of course, is going to lead to something like violence. It's not inherent in religion itself.
Yeah, and I wasn't ignoring it. I was looking at my bookshelf to try to find an example here. So, like, you listed some things, right, that I would say, yes, those are those things like, tribalism and authoritarianism or whatnot. These are things that we can call dangerous, right? And so, like I've argued before in my work, that I think nativism is dangerous. I think that extreme hostilities and prejudice towards immigrants is a dangerous thing to society. Why? Because when we look at this empirically across multiple nations in our society and as well as others, it is associated with more illiberal preferences, meaning like, okay, we should get rid of the courts, we should get rid of a free press, we should have a strongman leader, that sort of a thing. It's associated with decreased tolerance for democracy. It's associated with increased tolerance toward political violence, right? These are all kind of tangible outcomes that in it's robust. I showed in one paper that it's the strongest individual level predictor even. It's robust, right? So like this nativist wave that people are talking about in multiple countries, I say, yeah, that's dangerous because it's associated with the erosion of democracy, support for violence, like this, that, and the other things that we all kind of tangibly don't want around us. I guess then the comparison, the closest parallel I could draw then is like, show me then like hospitals closing in neighborhoods because religious protesters are saying that's denying the power of prayer or something, right? That would be the sort of, if that were to be my measure of like, is Christianity dangerous? That would be one that I would want to look for. Mm-hmm. Something like that, right? Where something, I think I have issues with this line of research, but I don't think it's successful, right? But you and I have talked about like Phil Zuckerman's research that can associate religion with like a host of tangible negative outcomes. There was a publication, Brown Oppie does the same. I think the citations are bad, but I thought that was at least an argument that religion is dangerous, right? That if you believe the string of citations from Oppie, which you shouldn't, religion makes you angry, stupid, prejudiced, and what have you, right? Like, to me, that's a dangerous thing in society if that's right. But so that's the sort of argument I guess I would be looking for, and that I expected to be defended. Yeah,
when you showed me that chapter in Oppie's book, I was surprised because Oppie's usually very intelligent, but then he was using like arguments you would get from like Matt Dillahunty on like trying to argue religion is harmful in that book, and I was so
meant his blog, I believe everyone that he's the best in philosophy of atheism. I'm not equipped to judge that. I believe everybody, Christian and atheist, who has told me that.
Yeah, but then like I was so dumbfounded by it. I sent it to Kyle, and I'm like, Oppie said this? Like, this is really bad. Like, oh man.
Yeah, well, I mean,
sense to put Holy Koolaid over Oppie. I mean, he defended a conservative, modest argument, and it was an honest one, I thought.
Agreed.
Presentation of data. I wrote notes, and all I had were little quibbles.
Agreed. Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair, I mean, he was sort of outside his expertise in that. But yeah, I was surprised when I found Graham Oppie reference those papers and make that sort of argument. So yeah, that was.
I'm not bashing Oppie.
No, yeah, me neither. I'm not, but I was surprised when he did that.
Yeah.
So
I was too, because I know he's a lot brighter than me.
yeah.
It's interesting with what you were saying, Ken, is with regards to this idea of nativism, is like actually some of the studies you sent me show that when people get more involved in church, more involved in Christianity, they actually move away from this nationalism, this nativism idea. So actually, this is something I even said in the debate. I said to all the secularists there, guys, if you want to discourage right-wing authoritarianism, Christian nationalism, you should be encouraging people on the right to get more involved in church and be more Christian. That would actually deal with those kind of issues more.
Yeah, admittedly, one of my mentors wrote one of the unchurched Christian nationalism papers, and someone very close to. So he's got a warm spot in my heart. But I also think the research is rigorous. There's some great research on like religion and social capital. Robert Putnam's like the secular scholar of social capital, and he has some beautiful things to say about religion. The latest one coming out is Robert Wuthnow's book. I don't know that I think it's out now. I wrote a review for that. I don't know when it's coming out, but it's very. He makes a more historical argument. I'm more of a number cruncher, but it's a great angle to see, and it's more interesting to read than me tabling numbers.
Yeah, based on a lot of the papers you gave me in that book, I'm thinking I might do a video on just that specific topic, talking about the historical and the studies as well. Just like something like, does Christianity lead to nationalism or does Christianity lead to authoritarianism? Something like that, because there's actually a lot of really good research that shows the opposite. When you want people to get away from that kind of stuff.
This is not a primarily religious field, by the way. This is what's kind of normative and what I like to share to people, right? Like, okay, is the average paper showing that Christianity is all sunshine and rainbows all the time? Of course not. That religion is all. And by the way, that's my framing. Is usually pro-religion, not particularly pro-Christian. I am a Christian, and I think there's beautiful things here. But just in case people are kind of skeptical and saying this is coming from like a place of bias. So a few years ago, Courtney Bender published an excellent edited volume called Religion on the Edge, Decentering and Recentering the Sociology of Religion. And like she actually, from a somewhat critical perspective, it seemed like felt the need to explain, like, why is the social scientific study of religion so glowing, right? Like that was like a known thing. There was another journal that was recently launched, I think like critical studies in religion. And they said, okay, maybe it's time to take a more critical in both senses of the term, like look at this, right? It's not to say there's never negatively reflective research on religion, but this sort of thing is really common. Like I don't think you could be fairly accused of like cherry picking. I don't know if you have in the past. Holy Koolaid didn't say that, I don't think. But I think this is, I think you're representing what I've seen out there, a lot of what I've seen out there pretty well.
Thanks. Yeah, I have been accused of cherry picking, and typically when I respond, I go, okay, cherry picking needs to be demonstrated. Show how I've cherry picked, and that's usually the end of the conversation. It's usually over at that point, or someone will send me Phil Zuckerman's paper. That's it. That's it.
There are always, like limited, small sample or isolated sample surveys. And sometimes people will try to generalize from those. And those are things you have to be careful for too, because they often don't try to advertise that in the paper. Like you can kind of get into the weeds and notice that. So I know I think that am I wrong? The Homo Negativity paper is that primarily out of Brazil?
That was actually an interesting paper, and the reason I cited it because it was out of Brazil, but they there's sometimes in a lot of these sociological papers they just sort of cite college students because that's the people that are most close to them. They went out of their way to make sure they didn't do that. They wanted to cite a very robust sample. They did some robustness tests, so I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. And so
so that's out of Brazil, and sometimes it's all you can get. I mean, there's a million papers published per year. That's all out of the United States, and nobody tends to gripe. I do about that. But,
I did quickly mention there were some others that found similar conclusions before I mentioned that. So there were some other ones there.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too. He cited, again, this is just quibbling. I don't think it's a draft or anything, but he cited Aviles, and that was a more of a proposal. So that one wasn't empirical, and he didn't say it was empirical, right? But I'm not accusing him of misrepresenting it at all. But I thought someone could listen to that and come away, if they don't know the different types of papers that are out there, that that was a theoretical paper proposing a model of how religion might explain some of the relationship between crime and religiosity. Sorry, how arousal theory could explain the relationship between crime and religiosity. And that was a theory, a good one, proposing what might explain it. The Cochrane paper was interesting because some of the relationships stood, some of them didn't. It didn't explain away everything. That was also just based on, I think, primarily or exclusively based on high school students in Oklahoma. So,
which paper was that?
That was he said a Cochrane et al. Paper to connect, also on arousal theory.
That's on religion and crime, right?
Yes. And so arousal theory explaining away the relationship between religion and crime. Again, that was a good study, right? There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with citing it. But I wouldn't say it explains away the relationship. Don't think he said that. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. But like, just for those that are listening and just not aware of like what the typical paper looks like, right? That's kind of a step. That's a step in the process. And right now, the state of arousal theory is one of many explanatory mechanisms out there. It doesn't explain 100% of variance. It probably explains something. And there's a lot of arousal, excitement and arousal to explain in a sample of high school students in Oklahoma, which may not be the same among, adults in Abilene, Texas, or older populations in Berkeley, California, right? And that's needless to say, the rest of the world.
Yeah, the Cochrane paper was also cited by Phil Zuckerman, and one of my favorite things about it is like he says it like this. He's like, some studies have found that religion decreases crime. Some have found that it doesn't. The problem is that when he cites a study that says religion decreases crime, he cites the meta-analysis that already included the Cochrane and the other papers he uses to cite that religion that doesn't decrease. So it's like it's not all equal. You're citing a meta-analysis that already accounted for these other studies that did not show a decrease. So it's a weird way to phrase the data. The actual overall data from the meta-analytical research shows that it does correlate with decreasing crime. But sure, you can pick out, a couple studies. Like I said, you could pick out like 25 studies that show religion is associated with more depression out of 400. It's like,
right. Yeah. And that is religion pro mental health. That is that's boring. That's not even controversial at this point. I've seen one person try to cite it otherwise at a professional level. Now, of course, there is what we call a dark side of religion, but that is necessarily by the name of that caveated, right? Like that's another side that, of course, abuse in a religious environment is going to be associated with poor mental health outcomes, right? Like, but it's whenever you see these sorts of things, they're usually highly contextualized. But you take your frequent, and it's individual and communal level too, right? It's not just explained away by being a part of a church community or a synagogue community. Or whatever, right? I hear that asserted as well. And there's something per se about like doing religion that the mind sure does appreciate.
All right. Is there anything else you guys wanted to discuss about the debate?
No, I just want to personally thank Ken for all the help he's given me in the past couple of months. It's been super, super helpful. He's actually given me some ideas for some new videos I want to do that'll be coming out months from now, of course, because it takes me a while to get to there. But yeah, appreciate you coming on, especially for you hosting today, Kyle. Overall, I was really happy to have the debate. I thought it went very well. I'm always happy to debate this topic because every time it comes up, I'm like, really, this is going to be easy again. Like that's not disrespecting Holy Koolaid, because again, I thought he did better than any other opponent I ever had on this topic because he prepared. He looked up stuff that I already did on this, which is better I can say about some of my other opponents. But I mean, like, this is a no-brainer. All the research is pointing in one direction. It's not dangerous. It doesn't harm. It doesn't lead to harmful effects. You can find minute studies here or there, but overall, the overall research is pointing in a positive direction.
Yeah, and I think a more interesting debate would be a debate whether or not Christianity is true, not whether or not it's dangerous. so yeah.
Agreed.
Anyways, I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you guys for watching. Again, I thank you, Kenneth, for coming on. Thank you, Michael Jones. And if you have any last words, any videos coming out?
Well, I mean, yeah, the next video is going to be one that Ken and I have been working on. Is Christianity Evil? I decided to go with that title. I think it's going to be more catchy of a title. And so I did another video like that, but it got taken down because of a copyright issue. So that'll be coming out. And I think about, in a week and a half or so. And then I'll be redoing some Exodus stuff. I want to do, it reminds me, Ken, I got to send you a script I'm working on the effects of religion and war and violence. Because you sent me that one on the interstate conflict study, which was really good. So yeah, I'll be working on that.
All right. Later, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Good talking to you.
Yep.